Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
And inspire you to do even greater things.
Good product managers are made through various experiences. I have believed that and experienced it throughout my career. I've often faced questions like what makes a good product manager? How do we write a job description for one? And there's no perfect answer to these. To me, the role is a tapestry of experiences that strikes synthesis and balance between needs and wants, product strategy, company growth, customer experience, managing expectations, and more. So listen to our guest this week, Seema Joshi, Head of Products at NICE, a poet, civil engineer, volunteer, state volleyball player, talking about choices, decisions, her career as a product manager, how she uses a sports analogy to illustrate teamwork, iteration, and mindset. As always, our guest also shares her tips for a career in product management or technology for aspirants. Listen on. Hello, Seema. A very warm welcome to you on the Software People Stories podcast. It's a pleasure to have you with us here.
Hey, Chitra, thanks for having me. Pleasure is all mine. It's a great initiative that you guys are on. So lovely to hear about these stories. It's an honor to be talking to you and catching up. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome, Seema, and the pleasure is all ours. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. So we usually start by asking our guests to introduce themselves to our listeners. How would you like to do that?
It's always a hard one, honestly. I think as you go with time, there are so many dimensions to it, but I'll perhaps, start with the software part of the people side of the stories. I'm currently the director of product management at NICE. We make software products for customer experience in the contact center. I've been in the industry now for about 20 odd years, mostly building products and building teams that build products. Outside of that, I like to volunteer and give it back to the community. So you'll find me volunteering whenever I can, and I have a chance to contribute for different forums, mostly around product diversity is another topic close to heart. And beneath that, I think a little bit on the inside, there is a little bit of a sports person and a poet. That's a little bit of me, Chitra.
Thank you, Seema. No wonder you said dimensions. I can already see so many of them, and looking forward to what all comes out in the course of this conversation. Where did the interest in technology begin? How did you get to choosing technology as your destination of choice?
It's interesting, and I'll kind of go back to this, and for some of us who were back then, sounds old now. I'm actually a civil engineer. I did my engineering from COEP in Pune, got placed in campus. I was actually working with a structural consultant, and while I always felt during my college days that I was more a site person than a design or an office person. Sometimes, as destiny would have it, I was doing stuff more on the design than I was on the side, but I loved it. I think a lot of foundational lessons kind of went there. But while I was in the initial year or so, I think I was also thinking to myself, while I liked what I did, I think I like technology, but I'm not really geeky, if you know what I mean. I think I still love to be with people and in between problems, and which is when I was making a choice when it came to further studies. Should it be an MSM Tech type of a route, or is it more of an MBA path? And I think I landed with the latter. And in that course of the journey, I actually picked my first role in technology with a company called eGain Communications. It was a customer-facing role, and I thought while I was doing this, it would be good to see what customers do and get to learn that part a little bit. So that's how I really, got started. Said no to a few things, and I said yes to something, and that's where the exploration started.
Interesting, Seema. I have two questions, and I'll start with the first one. How did this transition from a site person to a design person, from a civil engineer to a person in technology and software take place?
It's quite a journey, actually. When I look back and I think of it, it's been an interesting ride. So when I joined eGain and I took up my first role in a technology company, I honestly didn't know a whole lot. In fact, at that point, I think a lot of folks I had two choices. I passed in the batch of 99, which is when a lot of Y2K hiring was happening left, right, center. So there were all kinds of developer jobs, programming jobs that were open. And while I did a little bit of it, I really didn't enjoy it at heart so much. So I said, no, this is not what I'm going to do. I think that's where I made a promise to myself, unless I fail in doing things at least 3 times, I won't do it for a living. And thankfully that day has not come. So I really somewhere secretly feel good about it. So when I was at eGain, I think the next best choice for me really was, let's get closer to customers. And this role that I had really gave me a very good opportunity to do that. The first few years I spent in technical account management and sales roles. Like most companies, our primary markets were in the US and Europe. We were looking to expand in Australia, Middle East, Southeast Asia, India, and the Middle East. Like it happens again in most sales jobs, you first need revenue before you can start making investments. So we were really a small team that were kind of put out there, and right from doing our demos to making our cold calls to putting on the jacket and going in for meetings, working with our leaders to close deals, and really seeing it through till things went live. We were really just thrown into the ocean, and I think it has been one of the most key points of my career where I really got to see how customers make buying decisions, how there are multiple aspects that go into making a choice. There are different influencers, there are different buyers, there are different users. At the same time, you don't deal with just one or few prospects at the same time. From an offering perspective, you need to be relevant to a larger chunk out there. You really don't have an opportunity to tailor it to the T, if you know what I mean. And all this in a life where in sales, it's really about 0 and 1. So you become really, you win a deal or you lose a deal, and you can't have an in-between in terms of, change of scope, or let's do it differently, or let's do a first version. I mean, you just get it or you lose it. I think it also makes you result oriented in a very different way. I think a lot of the empathy for how customers buy, why they buy, and the focus on really solving real problems, because that's when someone is willing to put money on the table. I think are lessons that stick with me even today. I mean, I put different hats on different days, and when I'm looking through a proposal even today, I tend to put that on, saying, hey, this looks exciting for us, but is it going to be the same? So I think that's how I kind of started getting more. The approach was more market first, and then I later had an opportunity to get into a product management role. This was like more than 15 years ago. Not many people did it. And for me, it was where in any enterprise sales, you can do 2 or 3 big deals at any given point in time. Here, I had an opportunity to bring all the learnings that I had, bring those contributions back into building something for the market. And hence, I have since stayed in this, combination of let's look at problems, what can technology do? And we have people to make that happen. And, somewhere in that equation, again, in different roles, either in a more pure play product management hat. In some cases, it has been innovation centric. I also ran a social impact startup at a certain point in time. But really, that's where from a civil engineer, being on the site, getting to people, looking at the market, and really, trying to build something that can create value for business and for users. And that journey kind of started on and is still on, and I still find that triangulation as a good place of challenge and an opportunity both.
Nice, Seema. One of the things that you just said, there's so much going on at any given point in your life. I can imagine maybe someday you'll write a book, A Day in the Life of Seema as a Product Manager, and I can only imagine how rich that book will be with all your stories from your early days of stepping in to understanding technology enough to stand in front of customers and listen to their problems and perhaps craft the right solutions for them and close that deal. What stands out to you in the form of, let's say, 1 or 2 stories or examples that you can share with us where you were able to either provide the right solution? Like you said, a deal is either a 0 or a 1. So what I was looking for was for 2 examples, 1 of each kind, of a 0 and a 1.
Yeah, no, certainly. And maybe I'll start with a 0 first. And that's what sometimes happens in the excitement of when you're in a sales situation and you're talking to a client. So here we were talking to a client, and coincidentally, I was in the same domain back then. This was when there was a lot of typical interactions of businesses with consumers were mostly over the phone. IVR was a big thing. Email, chat, websites, e-commerce in whatever little shape and form, mostly for, retail was what was happening back then. People were looking for a number of different types of solutions. And chat was really, beginning to pick up. A lot of websites did want to put that out as a primary way to be able to interact with customers. And that was all great. And we decided to build a solution that could take it to the next level and help them also collaborate with the customer in real time for a few critical things. Now, this was a great vision. And when we spoke about it to our customers or prospects, they all liked the idea of being able to handhold a customer online because it was a big thing back then. And today, most users are digitally native. At that time, that was not the case. So really, driving user behavior to go them to a digital channel and then actually complete something that had a financial value or that was a key submission, be it a purchase or a form submission or or a renewal, there was hesitation in doing that. So we were super excited about this vision that we had, and we pitched the vision. Our clients, of course, liked it, and in one particular case, it doubled down really quickly. Now, this is when I think my first learning kind of came through, right? You have a vision and you have a path to the vision, which becomes in the form of a roadmap. And a roadmap comes at a certain time. Now, I was in this conversation. We were all set in the right direction. The client needed something which was not coming until 18 months or so. And while our confidence level on that deal was at 90% because current requirements, strong alignment, future vision, good alignment, a lot of ticks that you would do in a typical sales situation were all looking good. But the big bummer was the big bet that we were playing was actually only going to come after 18 months. So we were not going to be in a situation to close the deal yet. And also, I think my learnings about, revenue recognition nuances, which are very important eventually to when you close a deal and when a payment happens and it hits your bank account, but you can only recognize it after you've delivered the software. So even if the deal had been made, we would have been able to recognize that revenue only when the feature would have gone live. So it put us in a situation where either we could prepone the feature or we had to wait for such a time. So I think in that lens, it was really a little bit of a bummer thing. And I learned some very important lessons. And I think I was able to take those back on in my role of building products. And in products, it's all about choices and it's all about prioritization and choosing one versus other for some very good reasons. I think that was a little bit of a, bummer. And in terms of, the other example, interesting story again. Here we were working with a semiconductor company. They had global offices. They'd in fact procured our software for their sales offices in the US, and they were looking to expand the same for their support and service teams or organization. It was actually a different entity altogether in Southeast Asia. Both buyers were different. The use scenarios were different because one was more sales, the other was more support and services. I think that was an entire lesson for me on having global stakeholders, how regionally people have different ways to look at things and to evaluate things, even if it was the same product and the same problem that we were trying to address for the client, but the way we had to do it was completely different. And I remember we worked very, very closely with this particular client over multiple months. We were very close to aligning with their senior leadership right up to their global CEO. And they had a couple of new stakeholders who came on the project, and they looked at a few things and they actually said that they wanted to add a few dimensions, and that totally threw off the entire evaluation so far. So actually, I remember going into a meeting and telling the customer that, hey, look, if you think that you really need these 3 dimensions, which are so different than what we've been talking about, I think we are not a good choice, and we should perhaps call this off. And there was deep silence in the room for about a couple of minutes. And I think that pause, we would otherwise think about in life, gave them an opportunity and us an opportunity to just reassess and see what was important. Of course, next morning we got a call from their leader saying, hey, we've relooked at everything and we really think, what we had identified initially is what we want to do. We were able to double down and close that one much sooner than we had anticipated. Interesting stories where on one side things were looking really rosy, it didn't. And on the other side where it looked like it could have gone off track, just staying on topic helped us do the best thing for the client and for us at that time.
An interesting contrast, and no wonder it's become somewhat of a tagline for you, the zeros and ones. So coming to a question here that you just mentioned, the life of a product manager is in the realm of choices and prioritization. What do you use, when you have to make the right choices or make choices, right or wrong, is a consequence of decision making. And what have you learned over the years in terms of what works while trying to prioritize a backlog or a list of requirements?
No, certainly. And I think this is something, and I think I consider myself lucky. I've had a chance to work with, organizations and teams of different sizes and that had access to different investment dollars. And if there's one thing that's common, it doesn't matter if you're a Google or a Microsoft or a startup or, a VC funded entity, there'll still be finite investment to the ambition that you have. The ambition is always going to be much larger than your investment outlook. I think that is perhaps, something that goes without saying. The thing that I found that, really works is actually some of the basic things. Maybe we'll start with where the trouble starts with, right? And we've become a crop where there is so much that's happening all the time, and we have got used to react to different things and respond to asks that come from us, and we're all anyway pulled in many dimensions, and sometimes those are rightful and sometimes they are not, and it goes back to what's urgent and important and really being able to look at all of that. Now when you're building a product, and I think which is where a little bit of a product DNA and a service DNA sometimes becomes important, doing the right thing for your customer is often the reason why 100 requirements can get pushed. Now these may be coming from 70 similar customers or unique customers. You may have 10 or 20 who may be coming from execs or from folks who are on the field. Some of it may be coming purely from what is your ambition on the new big thing that you want to build and really do that big leapfrog ahead of the competition. And some may be just pure competitive things you want to do because your competition is also competing with the same rigor on a daily basis. Now how do you really make sense in all of this? While there is a lot of activity which happens bottom up, I think prioritization is best done when it's top down. So being able to really look at what is our priority and what is it that we as business really want to go create an impact for, and how does that translate into my product strategy and product vision. I think an important thing that I learned at my stint in the startup was you can't sell what you can't build, and you can't build what you can't sell. So really, being able to look at your target market, on where you're really going to take and create an impact right now, and how are they going to consume it. And when we say consume, right from how a buyer is going to discover, explore, buy, to a user being able to try, install, use, retire, that entire life cycle. So I think it really is, what is the alignment with our strategy? What's the alignment with how a buyer is going to, really going to procure this? What's the alignment with the journey our user is going to have? And in that journey, what problem are we really going to solve? I think being really close to, and I like to use a 3P type of a formula. Who is the persona? What's the problem? And how pervasive is it? And if you get a good answer for this, this is a good candidate for you to consider in your backlog of 100. Now, there may be many that go through, and I think in the many that go through, trying to find a mix of some of those that can really be delighters. And I like to borrow from the Kano model sometimes. They look at things as either those which create delight, which translates into a very definite way of perceiving and interpreting value. Some may be business as usual, you need to do it, and the others are going to be dissatisfactors, the lack of which is actually going to come back and hurt you or is already hurting you. I think when you break it into buckets like that, it's much easier. Then you know that you certainly don't want anything that is a big dissatisfier or a turn off. You want to create some delighters, and everything else is going to be in motion. You will always be, at a 18-20, and there will be some catch up you or your competitors are doing. I think if you are able to do a good job at the other two, the rest of it will tend to fall in place.
Good tip, Seema. I'm sure a lot of our listeners who are product managers or intending to take up product management as a career, we hope you're tuning in, because these are, nuggets from somebody who is living this life day in and day out. So thank you for that. I'd like to shift tack here a little bit, Seema, towards building teams. You said you have had a lot of experience building product teams. What is it in your experience that has taught you about building the right teams to build great products, and or what is it that brings people together? Because a lot of product management is about, like you said, talking to different stakeholders. Different stakeholders see the problem differently, for example, and you've worn so many hats in your career. As a salesperson, it was important for you to close the deal. As somebody who is a product manager, the customer experience, the value, the perception of it, plus, working with engineering teams to make sure that you're conveying the right requirements, prioritizing them, and building the right product. How does all this play into building a great product team?
It's actually a loaded job, and it's not easy, to be honest, because there are multiple dimensions. And I'm going to perhaps, look at this in two parts, Chitra. One is just building product managers and a team of product managers, right? But product teams are, eventually much larger because you are working so closely. It is a full-time cross-functional job. And I think for product management as a role itself is a little niche. It's not like a lot of other roles. It's a role that requires someone to have a lot of ownership so you're accountable without a lot of authority. That's the kind of a role that it is. Often folks in product management, or, at least to a good amount of their career stages, they're individual contributors, and sometimes they have like very high impact roles, but they may still be an individual contributor, but you are on a daily basis influencing a lot of people around you, like you said, right? So I think from a competency perspective, for an individual as well as for a team, there are two aspects which are quite key. And I like to think of it often in the lens of the iceberg model of competency. One is on the top, which is often your skills and competencies, which are very learnable. Now, these could be things like the domain that you operate in, the technology stack that you use, the regions that you have your client base in, different regulations that you may have, which need to be adhered to, and so on and so forth. All learnable stuff. So, and the second part is really, below the iceberg. And the below the iceberg, it's really about a lot of values and triads. And this is the less apparent part. Now, when it comes to a product, the decision making is in a landscape which is very ambiguous, because you're figuring out what to do, you're figuring out where you're going to go sell, you're figuring out what your competition is going to look like. And it helps to be data driven, but often being cognizant of the fact that data will be insufficient and it may be inaccurate, you need to make a lot of decisions. So I think you really need a gut where you don't feel the discomfort operating in a world that's ambiguous. You are going to have to try out a few things. You will need to make some decisions. You will need to say yes and no when there is no clear path that's available. And most people in the room will be looking at you to be the one who is, putting your proposal on the table. All of this in such a way, which moves us to the second part of what you asked is, how do you really build this with teams? Because you need to do this in such a way that you are building the confidence of your sales teams, you're building the confidence of your engineering teams, of your support teams, and so on, and your executive team, of course. I think the big skill that comes in or kicks in here really is, how are you able to create partnerships of trust and collaboration? Are you really able to look at the same situation in such a way that they are able to internalize it in the lens that is apparent to them? That's a big job, I think, where you need to be able to do this individually. And honestly, I think there's a lot of, over the last 15 years now, I think there is a lot of interest and conversation about product management, but it helps for people to know, what the role is and really see if that's something that you enjoy. And if you do, you should totally, jump and take that ride. I think you will enjoy it. And expanding this to teams, really, you end up building a team of really strong individuals who are able to look at this for their respective areas that they are driving, but at the same time also collaborate in such a way that it's like you have to take the village with you, and you're taking many villages with you to the big destination. While really building that team, you are trying to create a talent strategy where that, you're really good, where you're able to look at where are we going from here? Are we executing at the pace at which we should, at the cost at which we should, and in the way that we should? I think all these aspects become extremely critical when you grow and explore that, expand that to larger teams just beyond to product and beyond product.
Thanks, Seema. That was very, very interesting. The one thing that you mentioned several times in the course of this conversation was the ability to stay in the problem space. How did you begin to get comfortable just staying with the problem and exploring more versus typical engineering mindset is one of, can I jump in and propose this solution, or, get the customer to look at what I have to say, okay, this is how we can fix it, and so on and so forth. So how do you get comfortable with staying with the problem space?
Yeah, I know. And that's a hard one. I mean, and for me, sometimes, and especially early in my career, it was like a double whammy. On one side, it's that engineering itch where you want to jump to the solution because it really looks good to be the one who says, hey, look, I have the answer. On the second side, spend some time in sales and, it was like, yeah, I exactly know what this customer wants right now. Can we just do it that way? Now, and I think it was certainly a symptom which came up more often earlier in the career, but being able to navigate that, and a couple of things which have really helped is I'm a big proponent of looking at anything actually for that matter from a journey perspective. I think it's very important to be able to take a step back and really look at the entire landscape as a journey. I'm going to take a step back and let's take a look at how we design organizations and how we operate. You have departments dedicated for sales, marketing, R&D, product, support services, and whatnot. And now everyone in their good intent and to the best of their capacity and interest are doing the best job every single day to make this happen. But we're all living in silos, and we are all living and working off of our view of how it needs to be. And when you are trying to build something for the market, it becomes even more tricky because you're trying to, it's like this n is equal to 1 and n is equal to many. When you're doing it for one customer and in a services business, it's relatively easy because their really success is about creating the most tailored experience that you possibly can for what the customer has a need for. And you go ahead and achieve that, or in fact exceed that. And that's like a fantastic job done. Now, come to the product world, you are intending to do the same thing for a market. And here it's not about one customer, but it's about many. And then you have to find of what kind are those, which is really, where it goes back to which target market am I trying to go after? And I've seen when you change this conversation on this is how my customer is going to explore it, and this is how they're going to try and purchase it and onboard it and use it and whatnot, and then flip back and look at how is it that we as a company operate. I've seen that it really helps you, see, are we doing the right things? Of course not. You won't be always able to do everything, but it helps you make the right choices in picking those up. In the same way, when you extend it to which are the problems that are worth solving, even if you go back to just the feature part of what they're doing, it's really about who is my persona, what are they trying to do, and how frequently are they trying to do. Start talking the language of a journey, it just changes the whole thing from, hey, this is possible. It's like almost getting into a solution-centric way, saying, I can use AI to be able to predict the next meeting time. And maybe that meeting time is between Chitra and Seema. And then, we may just take a step back and say, hey, Chitra has been hosting a lot of podcasts, and she does it once every X interval, and she needs so much time. Looking at her calendar looks like this is the best time to do it. Now, we could have done the whole fancy AI way of doing it, and maybe that would be right, but maybe it's not unlocking maximum value for Chitra. And bummer, we are caught with, a solution first versus how do we stay there till we've spoken enough to Chitra, till we've learned about her life, till we've learned about what does day in the life, day 0, day 100, day 300, and what are the special events. And I think that gives you a good sense of moving from unknown to known of what you're trying to solve.
Nice, Seema. I think this is something that I personally heard very few people talk about with a great degree of experience and comfort, if you will. But I think this is so important for people to be able to be comfortable by staying in the problem space to develop great product. You have mentioned that having a sports mindset is something that has helped you in your career, and particularly in your role as a product manager. How has that come about?
On a lighter note, if someone were to ask me, can you tell me one thing that you've done right? I think my answer would be sports. I think if there's one thing that I've done right in life is perhaps having been a sports person. I think there are a lot of who I am and how I go about things. I attribute a lot to my early days. I played sports for my school and later for the state for most of the schooling days. I think as much as I was in the class, I was also in the sports ground, and multiple lessons I think that came from there. I think one kind of borrowing from that to a product manager's life, right? And I'll perhaps talk about my first service. I mean, in a volleyball court, it's a 9 by 18 meters court, and the net is at a certain height. I was in class 5 and I started playing, and I was really, frail and tiny. We used to try to hit a service across the net. My service would barely go even till not even the 6 meter line. for a few weeks, and then it went to the 6-meter line, and then it went to the 9-meter line, still just at the line. Then one day it hit the net from below, and finally, after I think 3 months or so, it tipped over on the other side, just feebly. And I think I was full of joy. But when I look back, I don't think in any of that time I was bogged down with the fact that, hey, the service has not gone through, or I was getting worked up. I just did what was needed to be done on that day, was to take the ball, give it my best shot. And iteratively, I was improving. And I think that's what we do with the product. You take something, you give it your best shot, you see where it's landing, and then you iteratively make it grow. Of course, I continued to play for a long time after that, and I got good with the game. And then I was at a stage very soon with enough practice and coaching that I could exactly hit the service where it needed to be. Not too far, not too close, not too fast. Or if it needed to be really fast, I could land it where it needed to land. I think that's what it is in the product world too. You have an ambition, but at the same time, you execute one shot at a time. I think when you do it like that, it removes a lot of panic. It removes a lot of risk in the process, but it still keeps you oriented on where you think you're going to have the maximum bang for the buck.
I can definitely resonate with that, Seema, having been a basketball player myself. Thank you so much for sharing that example. I think sports has always been a good example for a lot of things, and for people to comprehend. Even if you're not a sports person, you definitely watch sports, and more importantly, I would say even team sport.
Absolutely. And in fact, if you just extend it to that, I think if there are any, one or two key things, well, again, there are so many. I think the camaraderie that you build, you always play as one unit. It doesn't matter what you individually are good at. Now, of course, each sports person has some skills which are better than some of the others. But eventually on game day, it's about how we as a team can bring the best of what we need and on the strategy that is going to help us on that day. You never execute in isolation, and you just do it as one unit. And I think that whole building the camaraderie and actually playing and losing or winning as a team, I think is a big one. It's highly competitive than most things out there. But yet the tendency often, leaving aside side cases, it's really about fair play is the norm. So you really are very open to be out there. You're competing in the open. The performance is up for everyone to look at. There are no performance reviews in a closed room. It's all out there. And everyone is okay with that. And we learn and grow, look at the next game together. I think big part of how you operate differently with that mindset.
Absolutely, Seema. I hope we can talk about more sporting analogy, perhaps in future podcasts, or who knows, in other forums. I would certainly look forward to something like that. I would like to go back to one question. It's been plaguing my mind. So I basically grew up in my career more on the engineering side of work. I learned a lot by working with some really great product managers. We've had our tough moments while, negotiating with product managers in terms of which features can come when, and what is it that customers are looking for vis-a-vis some of the things that my engineers would come back to me and say, the PM just doesn't get this, because if we have to make this one change, or if we have to build this new feature, here's what it's going to cost us to build it, and so on. How have you built bridges with engineering teams? What is it that you would like to share with us in terms of your formulas for collaborating with engineering teams?
That's a large place of where we live our lives, right? And this comes up often. Each time, be it a new Scrum team, be it new product, new module, anywhere, local, global, any combination. But I think one thing that's been a very key part of how I have operated, and I've managed to, have the best collaboration going. And this takes time sometimes. At the least, it may take 2 release cycles, because in the first release cycle, when you're working with a new team, you're just trying to learn how people operate. And even in any engineering team or even product team, right? I'm sure every product manager has a style of working. Similarly, everyone, you may have some teams that like more autonomy, some like more collaboration, some like to be like, hey, let's just know exactly how we're going to do this. I'll go back, do my bit, you go do your bit. And there is no right and wrong, right? But I think really when you're in a product manager's hat, it's your ownership to find out what's the rhythm at which the team operates. How is it that they like to, get on to problems, and being able to work with them in a rhythm that makes sense. Now that seems like too much, but it's actually not. It's just about, being a little more empathetic, listening a little more, and kind of, getting onto the table in a way that the rest of the team is on. The second big thing that I've always done with my teams, and sometimes it comes through the form of, hey, we have a problem. Sometimes it's in the form of something may have gone a little south than you would have liked it, or it is just purely, hey, how do we make this thing work best together? And a big piece in making this is the product manager is wearing a certain hat and he brings a certain insight to the table. Similarly, we have an architect and an engineer and a QA and a documentation and a UX person who have their perspective, which most of us are not going to by default see it. And I think the big way I've been able to see the breakthrough come is when you have that moment of realization saying, hey, look, we're all on one side of the table and the problem is on the other side. I think when you start approaching the problem more than the people more, or attacking the problem more than it's seeming like, hey, you're challenging my team or you're challenging me, I think it's a nuance where you're able to, kind of make that shift. And the other thing sometimes where I think product managers can get to be in an overdrive is, again, if they come from a technical background, or if they come from a certain domain, or if they come from a particular familiarity, you may feel you know the answer. And it's the same for the other side of the house. If it's a B2C product, for instance, each of us feels I am a prospective user and I know exactly how my journey looks like, and this is exactly how every customer is going to do it. I think the best way to approach some of those is, with all good intent, we should put all our ideas on the table, but we have people to make the best choices for which decision needs to be made. And I think when we start respecting that as a team, where we challenge each other, we can agree as much as we want to, we can disagree as much as we want to, but walk out of the room with the best solution, I think is where really you're able to have that good tension, but yet not get bogged down with that.
I like the way you summarized it, saying nice to have a good tension and not get bogged down with it. Thank you, Seema. I noticed that we're coming to the end of this conversation. As we come to a close, what would you like to leave aspiring product managers or people wanting to take up a career in the area of tech with?
It's an interesting way of looking at things, right? I think one, looking at careers in tech, it's actually a very wide universe just with that lens, right? There are multiple things. I think the kind of businesses that are coming up, the way technology is actually enabling different possibilities. There are so many new trends. Trends can be driven by cutting edge innovation in the technology space, or by the application to a certain industry, or the application to a certain type of a business, right? I mean, think of the Ubers, and they really created the platform economy that we've seen in the last decade. Before that, we had a lot of technology driven innovations which were mostly impacting the way we communicated. Today, experience is a big thing. Virtual reality is just expanding the whole thing in a different way. I think one is, when you look at the role that you want to get into, and I'll perhaps take a stab at a generic one and then get into the product, is there will be trends, there will be things that look cool, and there will be things that you believe are going to create that impact, and they will. Each of them has the potential to do that. But I think, the way I like to look at it is, your reason needs to be stronger than the season. Otherwise, it's going to keep fading, or it's going to keep changing. And that's not going to be a very happy situation to be in, because it can seem daunting, it can seem anxious, it can also seem not so very path that moves forward. So really, why do you want to do what you want to do? What does it look like? What is it and what is it not? I think becomes extremely important, especially if you're picking on a niche role like product management. Like I said, I got onto this path when most people, if you look at the Indian evolution, most companies were in IT services doing extremely well. We were driving a lot of large business deals, a lot of growth for people in that whole thing, but there were still very few product companies. Within product companies, there were very few product people. I remember I used to get asked the question on, what's the difference between a project manager and product manager for a good amount of time. The common advice that I often got was, hey, this is, to do this well, you can't do it from India. You need to be in the US or Europe or someplace else. And sometimes the only way to do it is to do it. It's been a long journey. For anyone who is looking to get into niche roles, I think it becomes important to see what's out there, because niche roles will come with their own opportunities and their own challenges. And you will certainly in your backpack need to have some extra focus on why are you doing what you're doing. There will be some pioneer's pain also, and you will need to persevere with that, because you will be figuring it out. The ecosystem is figuring it out. There is no standard way of how the job is done, how it interfaces with different entities. What does growth look like? There is going to be constant comparison, and it may just kind of, pull you down. If you don't like figuring it out so much, and if you don't like stomaching it, maybe you want to pause and think. On the other side, if you really like a well-laid, fast-track path in technology, then sticking to, more streamlined paths is better, but they can tend to be crowded. And then it helps to find ways to pick skills that can help you get there faster and far. But it's really a choice for product folks. I think for most people who want to get into product management, my first advice is first try and learn what really does a product manager do and what it takes to be a good product manager. And then you can decide for yourself if that's something that you will enjoy doing for the rest of your, or for a good part of your career.
I think very nicely put together, Seema. I think this is just very sound, coming straight from somebody who's as experienced as you are. I'm sure a lot of people that are going to listen to this will have a lot to take away from here. I want to say thank you so much for giving us this time with you. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Want to say a big thank you for being part of our show.
Thanks for having me. Loved it too. Took me back to a lot of interesting times, which sometimes you forget on a busy day. So thank you for that, Chitra. Loved the conversation and catching up.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People Stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.